The savanna stretched out endlessly. A sea of golden grass under a deep blue sky. A few acacia trees stood scattered across the land, their flat tops casting small islands of shade. The heat shimmered on the horizon, and the air smelled of dust, sun and life. Thomas adjusted his hat against the glare. After nearly 60 years on this earth, most of them spent under skies just like this, he had learned to listen to the land. Every whisper of wind, every distant cry, meant something. He was halfway through his morning patrol when he heard it. A faint sound, barely more than a whimper, carried on the breeze. Thomas stopped. He turned his head, narrowing his eyes. Out here, you didn't ignore strange sounds. Especially not weak, desperate ones. He moved toward the noise. Boots crunching softly on the dry grass. His rifle hung across his back. But he didn't reach for it. Whatever was out there wasn't a threat. It was a call for help. As he walked, the sound grew clearer, a high, thin mewling. Not a bird, not a jackal, something younger, smaller. Thomas's sharp eyes scanned the land until he spotted a break in the grass, a narrow crevice, where the earth had cracked open during last season's rains. He approached carefully, peering down. There, wedged between the rough stones, was a lion cub. The little creature was half hidden in the shadows, its golden fur dusty and scratched. It struggled weakly, its tiny claws scrabbling at the slick rock. With every movement, a small cry of pain escaped its throat. Thomas's chest tightened. A cub, he murmured, crouching low. Poor little thing. The cub's eyes, wide, scared, but still burning with life, locked onto him. Thomas moved slowly. Quick movements would only scare it more. He slid his pack off his shoulders, pulling out a rope. The crevice wasn't too deep, but deep enough that the cub couldn't climb out on its own. "Hang on, little one," he said softly, as he tied a loop. A low, rumbling growl rolled across the savanna. Thomas froze. He didn't have to look to know what it was. He turned his head slowly, and saw him. Leo, the great lion, stood about 20 yards away, his golden mane catching the sunlight, his massive body still and coiled with power. His amber eyes were locked on Thomas. Unreadable. Thomas raised both hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "It's your cub, isn't it?" he said quietly. Leo didn't move. His gaze flicked from Thomas to the crevice, and back again. It was a silent standoff, man and beast, each protecting what they cared about most. Thomas knew he didn't have much time. He had to act fast, but carefully. He offered a low, steady voice as he edged closer to the crack in the earth, never turning his back on Leo. The cub whimpered again, weaker now. Thomas gritted his teeth. No time for fear, he thought, only heart. And with that, he made his move. Thomas edged closer to the crevice, his every move slow and measured. He kept one eye on Leo, who hadn't budged. The great lion stood like a stone statue, watching, weighing every breath Thomas took. When he reached the edge, Thomas knelt and looked down again. The cub, Simba, he thought, was in bad shape. One of his back legs was twisted unnaturally, pinned between two heavy rocks. Blood matted the soft fur around the injury. The little lion's sides heaved with each labored breath, his cries growing weaker. Thomas set his jaw. He had seen animals in worse condition before, and he had saved many. He wasn't about to fail this one. He pulled his wooden walking stick from his belt. A sturdy, polished tool he had carried for years. With careful precision, he slipped the stick down into the crevice, nudging one of the rocks pressing against Simba's leg. The cub cried out, but Thomas didn't rush. He whispered softly, old words, soothing and low, not because Simba would understand, but because he knew animals felt tone better than meaning. You're all right, little one, stay with me. The rock shifted under pressure. Thomas leaned his weight into the stick, sweat beading on his forehead. At last, with a grinding scrape, the stone moved just enough. Simba yanked his paw free with a pitiful yelp, collapsing against the side of the crevice. Thomas didn't waste a second. He slid down carefully, his boots finding purchase on the rock walls. He scooped the cub into his arms, cradling him against his chest. Simba's tiny heart pounded wildly against his hand. The moment he straightened up, he felt Leo's presence sharper than ever. The lion had taken a step closer. Thomas could feel the weight of that gaze, not just as a ranger, but as a father would feel for a child in danger. Keeping his movements slow, Thomas pulled a strip of cloth from his pack. He gently examined Simba's injured leg, working fast but tenderly. It was bad, but not broken beyond healing. Thomas wrapped the wound carefully, his rough hands surprisingly gentle. There, he murmured, you're tough, just like your old man. Simba whimpered softly but didn't struggle. Somehow, even in his pain, the little lion understood he was safe. Thomas tucked the cub closer to his chest. Standing fully now, he turned to face Leo. The great lion was close enough now that Thomas could see the flecks of darker brown in his golden mane. The small scars along his shoulder, signs of battles fought and survived. Thomas stayed still, breathing slow and steady. He bent down, setting Simba gently on the grass, a few meters in front of him. Then he stepped back. The cub blinked up at Leo. Weak but alive, the bond between them was visible, a pull stronger than fear. Stronger than anything Thomas could explain. Leo padded forward slowly, his massive head lowered. He sniffed at Simba, letting out a deep, almost purring rumble. Simba answered with a tiny, broken mewl. Thomas took another step back, giving them space. His heart thudded with relief. The hardest part was over. But something told him this was just the beginning of a story neither he nor the savannah would ever forget. Thomas worked quickly, his hands moving with steady precision. He tightened the cloth around Simba's injured leg, careful not to pull too hard. The cub whimpered once, then settled, exhausted but calmer, just as Thomas reached for his water flask to moisten Simba's dry lips. A roar split the air. It was a sound that shook the earth. Thomas froze. He knew that roar, the raw, furious cry of a father who believed his cub was under threat. Leo, the great lion, charged into the clearing, dust and grass exploding beneath his powerful paws. His mane flared like a living flame, and his golden eyes blazed with rage. His teeth were bared, lips curled back in a warning as ancient as the savannah itself. Thomas rose slowly, his hands open and empty. He didn't move toward his rifle. He didn't run. He just stood there, calm against the storm. Leo thundered closer, stopping just a few feet away. He roared again, the sound rolling over Thomas like a physical force. Thomas held his ground. The two locked eyes, man and beast, the air between them humming with danger. "I'm not your enemy," Thomas said quietly, knowing the words themselves didn't matter. It was the tone. The stillness. The truth. Leo lowered his massive head slightly, his gaze flickering to Simba. The cub, still weak but safe, let out a tiny, broken cry from Thomas's arms. That sound cut through the tension like a blade. Leo's snarl faltered. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing, studying. Simba shifted weakly in Thomas's grasp but made no move to escape. Instead, the cub pressed into Thomas's chest, clinging to the safety he found there. Leo's breathing slowed. The fury in his eyes began to dim, replaced by something harder to name: confusion, caution, and deep, raw concern. Thomas didn't move. He simply knelt, as if offering Simba back. Gently, he laid the cub down on the grass between them and stepped away. Simba tried to rise but faltered. Thomas ached to help but knew better. This was Leo's moment. Leo approached slowly, muscles taut. He leaned down, sniffing Simba carefully. A deep, rumbling growl rolled from his chest. Not anger now, but worry. Simba blinked up at his father, letting out a soft, breathless whimper. Leo nuzzled him, rough but tender. His great tongue licked gently along Simba's small head, cleaning the dust and fear from his fur. Thomas watched, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. For a long time, Leo stayed like that, crouched over his son, shielding him with his massive body. Finally, Leo turned his head toward Thomas. Their eyes met again. There was no rage now, no misunderstanding, only silent recognition. Thomas dipped his head slightly, a simple gesture of respect. Leo held his gaze a moment longer. Then, with a deep rumble, gently picked Simba up by the scruff of his neck. Without another sound, the king of the savannah turned and disappeared into the tall grass, his precious cargo swinging gently from his jaws. Thomas watched them go, a slow smile touching his weathered face. Some meetings, he thought, were written into the land itself. Thomas thought it was over. He watched Leo carry Simba into the tall grass, ready to turn back toward camp where his bags were already packed. His transfer papers were signed. After decades working these lands, he had finally agreed it was time to leave. But just as he turned, he heard a sound behind him, a low, heavy breath. He looked back. Leo stood there, Simba safely settled under the shade of a nearby acacia. The lion's golden eyes locked onto Thomas once more. Dust swirled in the warm air between them. Then something happened Thomas had never seen before, something so rare it stole the breath from his chest. Leo moved forward, slow and deliberate. He lowered his massive head, then bent his front legs, crouching low in a gesture that looked almost like a bow. Not submission, not fear, gratitude, a king's thanks. Thomas stood still, leaning slightly on his worn wooden stick. He let the moment settle in his heart. The savannah around them seemed to hush, as if the land itself was watching. A smile touched Thomas's weathered face, quiet, humble, full of a kind of joy no words could ever capture. "You're welcome," he said softly, tipping his hat. Leo stayed low for a heartbeat longer, then rose, powerful and sure. He gave Thomas one last long look before padding back to his cub, the morning sun haloing his mane like a crown. Thomas watched them disappear into the golden grass. His hand tightened gently around his walking stick. The old ache in his knees reminded him of his age. But in his chest, something new stirred, something that hadn't stirred in a long time. Hope. His eyes drifted to the spot where his bags sat, neatly stacked and ready for the truck that would take him away from the only life he had ever known. He chuckled under his breath. "Not today," he muttered. Thomas turned his back on the road leading away and instead headed deeper into the savannah. Toward the old ranger station, his station, where he had spent a lifetime protecting creatures like Leo and Simba. The land wasn't done with him yet. And he wasn't done with it. As he walked, the sun rose higher, painting the grass in shades of gold and fire. The acacias swayed gently in the breeze. Life moved around him, silent, wild, eternal. Thomas's heart beat steady and full. Some men spent their lives searching for a sign to know when it was time to go. He had just been given a sign to stay. And in that rare, powerful moment between a lion and a man, he found something even rarer, a reminder that true respect needs no words at all. Just heart, and a promise to never stop standing guard over the wild things that trusted him to be there. Days passed. The sun rose and fell over the savannah, casting long shadows across the endless grass. Life moved as it always had, wild, untamed, beautiful, and Thomas stayed. The old ranger made his home once more in the little outpost at the edge of the acacia grove. The building was nothing more than a shack of wood and tin. But to Thomas, it was enough. His bags remained unpacked, gathering dust in the corner, forgotten. Each morning, he walked the land, stick in hand, boots crunching over the dry earth. He checked the watering holes, repaired broken fences, and watched the herds drift across the plains like living rivers of life. But he wasn't alone anymore. Leo and Simba began to appear, not every day, and never too close, but often enough that Thomas felt their presence like a quiet promise. Sometimes he would spot Leo first, standing at the edge of the clearing, the tall grass brushing his sides, mane glowing gold in the early light. Simba, still limping slightly but growing stronger with each visit, would dart in and out of the grass, curious but cautious. Thomas never approached. He knew better. Respect was the bridge between their two worlds. Instead, he would sit on the worn steps of the ranger station, a mug of tea in his hand, and simply watch. Sometimes he would talk softly, telling stories to the open air, about the old days. The battles fought, the victories won, the lessons learned, and though they never came close enough to touch, he knew they listened. A bond had formed, delicate, unseen, but unbreakable. It wasn't ownership, it wasn't taming, it was something purer, family, of a kind only the wild could forge. The villagers in the nearby town began to notice too. Reports came in, fewer livestock attacks, healthier lion populations, a balance returning to the land. They started calling Leo the guardian of the grasslands, and Thomas's name was often spoken alongside his two guardians, one of claw and one of hand. On cool evenings, Thomas would lean against the doorframe of his shack, watching the stars blink awake in the velvet sky. Sometimes, if he was lucky, he would see two figures silhouetted against the horizon, one mighty and sure, the other young and learning. Leo and Simba, the king and his heir. Thomas would smile, the kind of smile that came from deep inside, and tip his hat in greeting. The message was simple: I'm still here, you're still safe. In a world where walls often rose between man and nature, a different truth thrived here. That kindness, honest, patient, and true, could bridge even the oldest divides. Thomas had found a new family in the heart of the wild. And in return, the wild had found a guardian willing to stay forever.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.